Hey, we're back again. Another bad hair day for Gary. Today, this segment is going to be devoted to bur oak health, something that's critically important to the ecosystem in Minnesota, but more importantly, it's my favorite tree. So we're going to talk about it today. And we have three people that have joined us, three experts that have joined us representing agencies, private, commercial business, as well as municipal. And our guests today are, from left to right, once you get looking at things, will be Brian Schwingle, who is the Regional Forest Health Specialist with the Minnesota DNR. At center stage is Gail Nozal, who is the Area Manager for Davey Resource Group. And then to your right will be Hannibal Hayes, who is the City Forester for the City of Minnetonka. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to start off by addressing 5 questions, person by person, and then a little bit of chaos in between each question. So stick around. So for the first question, we're going to start with Brian Schwingle, and then from Brian to Gail to Hannibal. From your experiences, is bur oak health declining or at least worsen, or is it just a matter of you're looking at it more frequently now and so you're seeing it? And then the second part of that question is, just roughly, how long do you think this has been going on? So we'll start with Brian.
Okay, yes, I think there's a statewide decline of bur oak. And, I got 3 kind of data sources to go off of. And of course, it's my personal experience, which is biased. But then if you take a look at FIA data, it's clear that we've been losing bur oaks. The mortality rate's increasing. There are more standing bur oaks when you take a look at the last 2 survey periods in the data. And then, of course, you can take a look at aerial imagery, too. Like every 2 years, there's publicly available aerial photography over our forests, and you can see mortality there. And I took a look at this morning at some of my field visits across the state, one up in Bram, north of Cambridge, one in Shakopee, and then one way down in Albert Lea. And it looks like the mortality was clearly visible in the aerial imagery starting in 2015. There was, I don't have access to aerial imagery in 2014, so it might have started in 2014. But definitely you can see it in 2015, and then north of Cambridge you can start seeing it in 2017. So yes, things are dying. I think I recently was out at the spot north of Cambridge, and it looks like decline is slowing.
So that's good, kinda. I mean, it's less bad.
And I'm not, let's see, what other parts of this question? Let's see, roughly how long?
Roughly how long do you think this has been going on?
Yeah, 2015. 2014, 2015.
Great, thanks. Gail Nozal.
Well, I think that from a private perspective, probably we've been getting some calls probably around 2012, I would say. My colleague that's passed on, Mark Stennis, he and I went out and looked at some trees together, and it was a head scratcher at that time as far as, why are these declining? What's happening? And again, it was kind of a case-by-case basis at that point. As the years have gone on, you can start to see more trees in a larger geographic area. So maybe it's not just one tree in St. Paul. All of a sudden you're seeing some random trees in different parts of the South Metro or, further south into perhaps Goodhue County. So it's interesting because we started to see kind of a build of that over the years. So I think that we started seeing them around that time when residents started calling in with some basic concerns. I think that there are some weather impacts to this, and so as far as is it getting better, is it staying the same, I think it's varied a little bit. Still continue to get phone calls from residents saying what's happening. So some years, like last year, it seems like there weren't quite as many trees that I noticed, but in other years like this one, I saw them really early on. So definitely variable.
Great. And 2012 was that record growing season for heat and wind and drought, so could have set a lot of things up. Hannibal, from your perspective, same questions.
I would say that bur oak health is worrisome out in Minnetonka. When I first got out there in 2015, my predecessor, Emily Ball, had already been dealing or been diagnosing bur oak blight. And it seemed like we were losing bur oak trees mainly along the roadways at that time. So 2015, 2016, and then there's been a pretty significant decline, at least in the amount of trees that have died because of bob leading to other secondary vaders and things of that nature. Last year was absolutely atrocious. So 2019, 2018 wasn't too bad. We saw a decrease in the amount of symptoms of bur oak blight, but last year was bad, and this year we're just starting to see the symptoms. So at this point in time, I would say it's worrisome. And and we've seen it since a little bit before 2015.
Got it. Good. All right, the second question, we're going to go in reverse. We're going to start off with Hannibal now. So from your observations, have the health issues been increasingly fatal, just ugly, or not really a huge concern, at least in your case in Minnetonka?
The bur oak trees out in Minnetonka are mostly ugly. They're, a lot of the bur oaks do seem to leaf back out in the spring and do fairly well over the summer, but then it's the fall when those that are infected with bob look really bad. And so bob is our main issue. We do have two-line chestnut borer. We do have a little bit of oak wilt and bur oak trees out there as well. But for the most part, I would say that they just sort of look ugly. There are the occasionals that need to be removed because they do pose a risk. But having said that, we do have a lot of forested lands in our parks, and we have been noting quite a bit of bur oak encroachment out into those open grassy areas where they're actually regenerating, which is, comforting.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Gail, same question. Fatal, ugly, or?
I'd agree with Hannibal. I think that they definitely start off ugly. I mean, that's, from a homeowner perspective, that's what they'd say, is that it just doesn't look right, looks really ugly. But I think that over time, though, potentially with the impact, like Hannibal had mentioned, things like two-line chestnut borer, it does get into the point where it can become fatal with other issues happening, and of course with a risk situation, then you got to throw in the towel sometimes. So certainly it can progress.
Yep. So Brian, a statewide, or at least your region perspective.
I guess, just to be clear, I'd break down issues with bur oak blight into three categories, and of course they can interact. But I would categorize the first one as like decline. So where you get dieback starting at the tip, at the outer part of the crown, or like a proliferation of epicormics along the stem. And if that's the case, it seems like it's fatal. Like that tree is going to die. That's pretty soon. Then of course you got oak wilt, and that's a completely separate issue that obviously is fatal with bur oaks. And then you have bur oak blight, which factors into both of the previous two categories, which is, in my opinion, it's just an ugly situation that's sometimes not concerning for the health of the tree at all. Oftentimes, though, I think it indicates that the tree is stressed by something else. But I think that the most, serious thing is the decline, the statewide decline of bur oaks, and in that case, I'm afraid it's an irreversible situation, and I'm chalking it up to weather over the last couple decades.
Yeah. Does anyone have any concluding remarks on this question?
I guess the only thing that I would like to add is that with climate change and the climate getting warmer but also wetter is going to add to the stress of bur oak trees. but bur oak trees are also at least listed as a low vulnerability. As far as climate change goes, climate change is going to theoretically just weed out some of the weaker genetic strains of bur oak, and hopefully we'll actually see some other bur oak trees that'll be thriving. I'm wondering if we're not at like the cusp of that tipping, where we're going to just start seeing a lot of bur oak trees die, but there'll potentially be better genetic material out there in the future.
That's interesting. All right, we're going to move on to the third question, and this one I'm going to start with Gail. So from your observations, what have been the most common symptoms that you've seen since 2014, 2015?
Well, those initial ones that you would see in the lower part of the canopy, the browning of the leaves, that's something that would trigger somebody to say, hey, something's going on here. Obviously, some leaves that you'll find on the ground. One of the big pieces that I would oftentimes do is because I'm short, I can't always reach all those low-hanging, bur oak branches. So a lot of times I look to the ground sometimes to see if I couldn't reach them, what other things are happening in the leaf. So I typically am looking at the blade of the leaf to see, what types of leaf spots are on there, and then moving down to perhaps, the rib on there and looking at the main vein to see, are there any of the necrotic spot.
Hey, Brian, same question to you. What are the most common symptoms that you've been observing?
Well, death. I mean, in most situations, people call me out to investigate the problem when it's too late to truly figure it out. So, you can't really diagnose what's going on with the tree if it's dead. You have to catch it in the act of death. So I'm always searching when I get called out to these forests. I always am looking for trees in the act of dying, and probably the most common symptom in that instance is outer canopy dieback. And that might be just as, or epicormics along the trunk and the upper branches, recently produced epicormics, like in the last 2 years, might be actually just as common of a symptom. When we're talking about, when I get called out into the woods to look at dead trees, I think that it's probably a lot different for what Gail and Hannibal do, where you guys are looking at beautiful trees in manicured lawns and along boulevards and things like that. And of course, oak wilt on bur oaks, I would say, is common. And I see that a lot too, of course. And of course, the initial symptom there is outer canopy leaf loss, which looks like outer canopy dieback, which it is.
Yep. Hannibal, how about in Minnetonka?
I would second everything that Gail and Brian have said. Brown leaves in the lower crown hanging on, over the winter months, but then tip dieback in the crown, then wilting leaves on separate limbs within the tree and advancing down for two-line chestnut borer and oak wilt and things of that nature too. So, while we're seeing it on just a smaller scale, we do have wooded space out in Minnetonka, so we might see it on a couple trees, but it's by no means all over the entire city. So, and we do get called out for dead trees as well. And like Brian mentioned, it's impossible. Well, it's very difficult to diagnose what exactly caused the death of a tree before you can actually see any disease symptoms besides just death.
You can always find our malaria.
That's true.
Always.
All right, question number 4. And you're all sitting there wondering who's going to start. If you've been able to positively diagnose the issues, what have been the main culprits? And we're going to start with Hannibal.
Oh, I didn't want to start. We've already hit on pretty much all the main ones. So first would be bur oak blight for lower crown issues, and then two-line chestnut borer is prevalent out in Minnetonka. So that's typically what we're seeing, the tip dieback, but there is oak wilt as well. So it's just training in the inspectors and educating the public about, where is the disease symptom, or where's the symptom in the that you're worried about in the tree, but then and then going forward with what is the actual symptom. Just helps divide it out when you're trying to sift through everything. So,
Okay. Brian, would have been the main culprits that you have found?
Well, like I said, you can always find armillaria on a dead oak, on oaks that are almost dead. But armillaria probably is the most common agent, biotic living agent that can cause symptoms that I find. Now I'm talking about decline. I'm not talking about bur oak blight. I will mention right now that it's not. If I'm convinced of anything, I'm never 100% sure on anything, but I am quite confident bur oak blight is not the issue. It's other stuff. And so when I'm looking at these, just forests with declining oaks, I'm at the point right now where I'm not even trying to look for armillaria. I'm not even trying to look for two-line chestnut borer, because you can find those on any dying oak. With an oak that's dying of oak wilt, you can almost always find indicators of two-line chestnut borer. But of course, two-line chestnut borer and armillaria, it's a correlation thing, but I don't think it's a causation thing. With oaks and armillaria, unlike in pine plantations where armillaria can be a primary killer of trees without any stress agent ahead of time, with oaks, I'm just not sure if that's the case. If armillaria can be the primary agent. So, I see this wide area of Minnesota, actually the entire state, where the mortality rate of bur oaks is increasing. So then I just start taking a look at the weather record, and that's not easy too, because you can take a look at the growing season, even for 2012, I believe, and if you take a look at the precipitation in 2012 for the 6-month growing season from May through October, it's actually average or above average. Yet we had almost a record drought from like July through October of that year. And so when I split the growing season into 3-month segments, for example, centered in Roseville, we almost had a continuous drought where you had multiple consecutive years of drought from 2006 to 2014, 2012 being the worst. And then we started seeing all these dying oaks, and it wasn't just bur oak. North of the Twin Cities, we've lost thousands of red oaks too. And then you couple that with record growing season precipitation, like I think in 2016 and 2019 in particular. It's a rough environment for trees to grow in, and bur oak in particular, in the woods anyways, it's not as picky where it grows as like red oak. You can put bur oak on the edge of a wetland and it's going to do great. Along a river, it's going to do great. And then upland on a super dry site, it's going to do great. So I think what we're seeing, this is a guess, it's my opinion, but I think what we're seeing is these bur oaks, they're able to grow in these environments where a lot of other oaks can't grow. And because they're growing in kind of extreme microhabitats with extreme weather events, you're losing kind of these bur oaks that are growing in unfavorable environments. So I think that's what's happening.
That's a really interesting perspective like that. Gail, from a commercial standpoint.
Yeah, I typically think of bur oak as being a pretty tough tree, but when it comes to the urban and suburban environment, we're finding that maybe it's not quite as tough as perhaps it is in a different setting. Before even getting to the point of trying to diagnose something, or a lot of times it asks with a landowner, whether it's a commercial site or a residential site, is starting with a whole line of questions of when did you start to see this happen? When did this new patio get installed? When did they do that last overlay on the driveway? A lot of times a landowner or homeowner, is not thinking of the impacts that some of the things around the trees are having, even though, of course, as we all know with tree preservation, it doesn't have to happen right next to the trunk of the tree to have an impact. So with the canopies being so large, there's certainly a lot of things that can impact the health. That's typically where I would start is trying to piece together all those different questions, whether you're looking at we're talking about record dry years and wet years. I mean, we've got a lot of people that are irrigating their grass, for example, so there is some moisture getting to the top foot of soil for bur oaks, but they're still declining. So there's a whole conglomerate of issues that really could go into causing the challenges for the oaks. So I think a lot of times it's not singled on one single issue like Tubacia, for example. It's a whole collection of things that are leading towards that tree stress.
All right, this is not in the questions I provided, but I have to ask this question. And Brian said it best that the health issues of bur oak from a forest to an urban landscape are quite different because they're manicured landscapes, just like the one we're looking at now. But Gail, I have to ask this question. Knowing how dependent all trees are on mycorrhizal root associations, bur oak in particular, when you look at your clients' landscapes, which are probably largely weed-free, heavily mained turf grass, which is, anybody that has studied mycorrhizal root relationships knows that that's not a good environment for mycorrhizal fungi. Do you think that could be one of the more important contributors to stress, strain, whatever, on an urban grown bur oak?
I definitely agree with that. I think the more that we learn, the more we learn that, boy, there's not a lot there's more to learn about soils. It's a huge part of the health of the tree, and I think that we don't look at it often enough. So a lot of times in diagnosing a bur oak, it's really helpful. Let's just get a soil test. Let's find out what's happening there, in addition to perhaps collecting the information about what's been happening around the trees and perhaps getting a tissue analysis as well to properly diagnose the issue. But certainly soil health is huge, and I think it's becoming a more important piece to look at as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, dandelions and creeping Charlie don't go away on their own. So, all right.
And Guy, I've shared Gail's experience with, I do look at ornamental issues occasionally, and when you're trying to diagnose a situation in an urban environment or someone's lawn, it's harder because you're dealing with so many additional factors than I have to deal with in the woods. So a huge factor is the homeowner's memory. Huge factor there. I mean, people's memories are very short. And being an agency person, even though I don't have any law enforcement credentials, I'm just there to help people. But some people don't think that of me. They think, whoa, DNR, this guy's going to get me in trouble if he knows that I used this herbicide on the landscape. So oftentimes when I see herbicide damage, clearly, I'll ask the homeowner, well, what did you spray? And if they say no, nothing, I'll wait another 5 minutes and then ask them again. And if they say nothing, I'll just keep jogging their memory. And herbicides are certainly a factor. Soil compaction, huge factor. It's tough to diagnose these things when you're relying on somebody's memory, and there are just so many additional factors in an urban environment. It's tough.
I agree too.
Could I add one more thing?
Oh, good.
So a lot of times I think, while you do look at their lawn and see that there are very few weeds, I think more often it's not necessarily, certainly herbicide damage certainly could enter into it, but I definitely think that the compaction and other issues that put stress on the soil health environment are larger than just simply the potential inputs that are going into their lawn too. It's certainly, but yeah, the bigger question of kind of the interviewing of the landowner or the homeowner is huge. And I agree, there's a lot of amnesia that happens when it comes to what they did to their tree.
Well, you three are three of the kindest people I know. So if I was a homeowner and I was feeling shameful, I think I would want one of you asking me repeatedly, and I could finally, confess and not feel so bad, rather than be assaulted by somebody.
I'll just share a story. But so I was talking with a coworker, and the coworker said, "Yeah, bur oak blight is just going crazy in my neighborhood," and this was in rural Minnesota, and I said, "Well, I'd like to see that." So he took me to his place, and his whole yard was covered in bur oaks. I mean, we're talking maybe 50 bur oaks. There were only 3 that had bur oak blight, and they had bur oak blight very severely, and they were all growing next to each other. And so I was pointing out the fact that, well, you just have these 3 bur oaks that have bur oak blight badly. Can you think of anything that went on around these trees that might have stressed them out? And after like a 10-minute conversation, and we decided there is nothing, he mentioned the addition. And I asked him, well, where's the addition? He was like, oh, right here. And it was I don't remember exactly. I'd say between 7 and 10 years before my site visit. And they excavated out 50% of those trees' root systems. And so that's just one example where I can point to stress and then trees all of a sudden becoming susceptible or getting bur oak blight bad. And bur oak blight is a Tubaceous species, and we know with other Tubaceous species that they can grow in an endophytic way without causing symptoms until the tree is like drought stressed. And I really strongly suspect bur oak blight is like that.
That's a really good observation. So, question 5. If you have been treating or prophylactically addressing any of the issues you've been bringing up, what has been your experience in terms of successes or partial successes? And Brian, I fully acknowledge that, in your role with the DNR, you're really looking at natural forests, so I'm assuming you're probably not treating those trees.
That's correct.
So I'm going to go right to Gail as the commercial representative, because I assume you are treating or at least prophylactically trying to address some of the problems.
So I'd say going back to when we started to see symptoms, there's not a lot of research out there about, bur oak blight. And at the time, there was a lot of things, let's see what fungicides can do. So definitely there definitely were started with some treatments to try to slow down some symptoms or try to extend life of the tree. But to be honest, after doing that for a number of years, you're not seeing a whole lot of difference. I mean, I remember one case where, for 2 different clients across the alley from each other, we treated 2 similar aged trees. One tree responded well, the other one lost all of their leaves over time, not due to the treatment. And so it's interesting that it's not a silver bullet by any means. I mean, some trees respond well, some trees may not. So after treating trees over a number of years, I've come to the conclusion where I don't think it's the right thing to do as far as fungicides. It goes back to that whole collection of things happening with the tree. It's about keeping the tree healthy. And a lot of times people are calling you by the point where things are already declining heavily, and there may not be a whole lot you can do other than just kind of keep the tree healthy. So maybe recommendations regarding mulching and watering, perhaps some deep root fertilization, and of course making a recommendation regarding insecticide to help try to prevent any type of 2-line chestnut borer damage. But I would say, is from a commercial perspective, from my perspective, no, I wouldn't, probably not doing any type of fungicides anymore.
Okay. How about you, Hannibal?
So try to break it up into, so the abiotic impacts and the biotic impacts. The overarching concern is tree health. So making sure that trees are properly watered and then mulched to limit competition from other plants, mainly turf. We have done a few applications of plant growth regulators that on one particular large bur oak tree that lost a third of its crown because of a storm failure, or no, that happened on a calm day because of branch failure, and that tree seemed to respond fairly well. So we have tried, minimally PGRs, but then for two-line chestnut borer, we've done insecticide injections, which they seem to react fairly well to. And then as far as bur oak blight, we're just starting to sort of experiment with things which include fungicides. We're teaming up with Rainbow Tree Care to try to put together some type of field trial to incorporate or to compare, obviously a control, but then a couple different fungicide chemicals at different rates. We're actually tossing around the idea of actually pushing the trees to the phytotoxic reaction point where all the leaves would actually fall off in the fall to try to blow off all the inoculum of the tree. But then we're also looking at incorporating Glenn Percival's ideas behind mulching with pure willow mulches, but also biochars and things of that nature, and try to figure out what would be the best, because we have tried fungicides in the past, like Gail. We haven't seen consistent results, and I would hesitate to say even like good results when it does seem to work. It seems to be more of a factor of how much inoculum is still in the area when we do treat, but then also, are the trees still stressed, and are the environmental conditions good for bur oak blight? So we're just beginning to play around with some of that stuff.
It's really interesting. Glad to hear that.
I would like to see, and maybe some researchers have done this already, but I think there's a huge need to do kind of a side-by-side research project of appropriate watering for large trees during droughts, side by side with insecticide injections to prevent two-line chestnut borer. Because my big concern when I hear residents injecting their trees to prevent two-line chestnut borer, my concern is armillaria, because I suspect armillaria is more common than two-line chestnut borer. Maybe not, but I suspect that would be the case. And of course, insecticide injections to prevent two-line chestnut borer isn't going to do anything for the tree in terms of root loss from prior compaction or infection with armillaria. And if drought is a driving factor, you would think appropriate watering, which I'm not exactly sure what it is, besides deeply watering that tree occasionally during droughts. It would be interesting to see if that would help the tree more so than injections with insecticides.
I like that idea.
So you should come out of retirement, Gary, and just do that.
Yeah, that's going to happen. Well, one thing I do know is water is a heck of a lot cheaper than any chemical that we have. So why it's not turned to more frequently is beyond me.
And, go ahead.
The only curiosity I have, and one of the clients that I've been following for probably 15 years is on a golf course. So, using well water for irrigation, large bur oaks that are in the rough that have been there for, 50, 60 years. And they've been experienced bur oak blight. So there's a lot of questions when obviously managing on a golf course is very different as compared to a homeowner's property. And you can see that there haven't really been any changes in grade or health related to that. So I still think there's a lot of other questions out there. And I'd be curious to even look at with watering regimes, how does that compare with somebody that's been irrigating too? How does that impact it?
Yeah. And I always thought, just actually with other tree species over my career, you see the severe impact of drought. And it always seemed to me for a long time that, setting up a drip irrigation system to appropriately water these large landscape trees just is not realistic. But then I took a vacation out to San Diego, and I realized, they rig up their entire landscape with drip irrigation systems. So it is possible. It's just not part of our culture right now. It's a wild idea, I know.
Hey, that's why we're here. We're looking for wild ideas. Okay, crystal ball question. I'll start with Brian on this one. Any gut feelings about the status of bur oaks in the future, or just oaks in general? And obviously we're talking about for the upper Midwest.
My gut feeling with oaks is they're a great species for the future in Minnesota. We're losing a lot of older bur oaks right now, and I think it's because of past weather events, extreme weather events, and climate change modelers are predicting more extreme weather events, and that's going to be hard on all of our tree species. But bur oak in particular is a very flexible tree in terms of what it can tolerate, and I do think it's a great species for the future. In terms of whether this decline is going to continue or not in the rural forests and in the urban environment, I have no idea. I hope not. It seems like it's slowed down a little bit, so that's my crystal ball prediction. I'm not too worried. Not too worried.
I like that. Gail?
Well, I don't think it's going away anytime soon, especially with the complex of issues that you can have in an urban and suburban environment. I certainly think that education with homeowners and private landowners certainly would help as far as raising some awareness to it and just focusing on tree health altogether. But I still think there's certainly a lot that we can learn about it, and but I think it's something we definitely need to keep our eye on.
And Hannibal.
I'm not any more worried about bur oak than I think most other trees. I think that there's a lot of them, especially out in the wooded spaces, and I feel like it's still it's always been a hardy tree, widely dispersed. Like Brian was talking about, it grows in pretty much any situation except for directly in the water. So I feel like bur oak is going to hang on pretty much no matter what we really throw at it. In the urban environment, it's going to be a little bit different because there's additional stressors. But that's where we all come in to yell at people when they don't take care of their bur oak trees. But as far as oaks in general, I'm climate change isn't a happy topic, but the interesting thing is that as our climate warms, we'll actually have an opportunity to plant a wider variety of oak trees in Minnesota, which is something that is interesting to me, at least.
I think your answers demonstrate what experience does for us. Because I think all of us, the day we graduated from college, I knew all the answers. I could have given you 100% answers to all these questions. And the more experience we get, the more it depends. I don't really know what the weather's going to do. I don't really know what the reaction is going to be. But I really, really appreciate all of you being so honest and open with your answers to these questions and joining us. And for all the people that are watching this, I hope you're looking up at these beautiful bur oaks that we've been sitting under this morning. We're on the south lawn of Green Hall in the beautiful St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. And it couldn't be a better day for talking about the beauty of oaks. So thanks again. You did a really good job today. See you, folks.